Hello, this is Justin Williams with the Wolfpacker podcast. I'm joined today by a familiar special guest, former NC State defensive lineman Mike Rose, back joining us after 4-month hiatus from the 2020 football season. We're glad to have Mike back on. Before we get too far into this episode recapping the 2021 spring game, this podcast episode is brought to you in part by JFQ Lending. As we blitz into 2021, JFQ Lending wants the Wolfpacker.com members to take advantage of historically low mortgage rates. JFQ Lending has a Better Business Bureau A rating with over 2,000 reviews. They work with top lenders and do the hard work of finding the best deal for you. If you're curious whether refinancing your mortgage is a good decision, visit jfqlending.com today. That's jfqlending.com. And for our listeners, please remember to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast wherever you listen to us. We're on Apple Podcast app, Spotify, Google Play. You can always watch us on our YouTube channel. And while you're on our YouTube channel, please subscribe, give this video a thumbs up. All right, Mike, let's jump right into it. 2021 spring game. Spoiler alert to our listeners at home. NC State comes out with a solid win Saturday in Carter Finley Stadium. Good to have some fans back in Carter Finley Stadium. It was a nice afternoon for some football. Didn't get to see the full personnel, but everyone that was available on Saturday's game did get in the game. The red team defeated the white team 37-17. Granted, the red team had most of the expected starters and most of the people in the two deep, and the white team was made up of mostly reserves and freshmen, but there was some flip-flopping around going on throughout the game, and we were able to see some explosive plays on both ends of the ball. So, Mike, first of all, how you been doing these last few months? And B, I guess what were your initial impressions of what you're able to see this weekend in the red-white game?
I've been very good, just in Canada being cold. But I would say the biggest takeaway I got from the spring game is that this team is deep. Now, remember we talked about during the season how they weren't at all. They were thin, very thin at a lot of spots. But now those young pups are grown up. They're getting big. They're in the weight room with Coach Thunder getting swole. I saw some cats out there that look like they definitely beefed up, got some speed going. So I definitely think that the spring game looks like a typical spring game, but I definitely see improvements in the younger guys that were playing. It's sad to see. It was a little sad, every year you see guys go, but you see guys that didn't play, and you're excited if you could get the talent that's already there with this two potentially really strong two deep, that they could be dangerous.
Well, let's start with what everyone was watching the game for. Or most people were tuning in on Saturday, going out to Carter Finley Stadium to see Devin Leary in pads in somewhat of a live action environment for the first time in Carter Finley Stadium since late October when he broke his leg in the win over Duke last season. To me, Leary looked sharp. I think there's some throws that he wish he could have had back. I think maybe he was a little bit, not nervous, but I guess a little amped up in those first few throws. I think he started with 4 incompletions, overthrew an open man on the first throw, but all in all, also had some pretty impressive throws as well. He was not afraid to chuck it deep. I know it's a low-pressure situation, but he finishes the afternoon 12 of 23, 1 interception, but 2 touchdowns and 175 passing yards. So what were your impressions of Devin Leary? It looked like he was moving around fine without pain. It looked like his, no zip off the balls. I thought his throwing mechanics looked fine, all things considered. So, what was your impressions of Devin Leary?
Definitely looking healthy. The biggest thing is his connection with Devin Carter and Thayer Thomas. Like, he really likes those guys. Emezi didn't play, and also, probably one of the best tight ends in school history wasn't there. So, he definitely looked comfortable, and that's good for a quarterback. The past 2 years haven't been the greatest for the kid, just getting hurt and just being put in not the best situations. But I definitely think if this kid can stay healthy, he could be a top 3 ACC quarterback just if you keep him healthy.
Yeah, that was one of the main things I kind of took away too, is that connection with Devin Carter looked really good. There was one drive specifically where I think there was 3 completions in a row, and I think that was the drive that ended with Thayer Thomas finding Devin Carter in the end zone.
Move him to quarterback. You know what? I'm thinking if it all goes to crap this year. Just move Thayer Thomas as the number 2 quarterback. Nothing against Finley. Just Thayer Thomas has more touchdown passes, so I'm just going to go with Thayer.
Fair enough. I mean, Finley got one on the ground, but it's good for NC State to know that they've always got an emergency quarterback if they're ever in trouble. The quarterback room is completely depleted, but I don't know. I think it wouldn't have been a proper spring game if Thayer Thomas didn't throw a touchdown as well. And he also caught one, too. Three receptions, 39 yards for him, 1 touchdown. Devin Carter led all receivers with 5 receptions, 73 yards, another touchdown there. Porter Rooks got loose for one. He had a 58-yarder. I think that he was the first touchdown of the game from Leary. But we also talked about the reserve quarterbacks as well. Ben Finley, his first spring game, but he already has a season under belt, so he's a little bit more familiar with the system. I think that was pretty clear. He's the clear-cut second-string guy. He took reps for the white team throughout the first half and then took snaps for the red team in the third quarter. He finished the game 10 of 20. 160 yards, no touchdowns, but he did run one in. A little bit of a scary moment there in the first quarter. He got tied up on a handoff and it looked scary for a second.
Tanner Ingle is dangerous. Tanner Ingle is dangerous. He doesn't even mean to. I love it that he just is just flying around. He's just dangerous.
Well, he's got one mode, and I think,
which is great. That's what you want out of a defensive player.
Exactly.
It's just we just got to get the guy to practice a little safer. But, hey, this guy missed a lot of 20. So I know he's got some pent-up anger. He wants to prove a lot of people wrong. That's another guy who could potentially be an all-ACC guy if he stays on the field.
Absolutely. Talk about a guy I'm excited to see. I know that, there's been specific attention being paid towards playing clean football, limiting the penalties. NC State led the FBS level last year in penalties and penalty yards.
We need a rugby coach.
It is a top priority for this team throughout the spring, and that was one main positive that I was able to take away from the spring game. Only 1 penalty called in this game. Maybe there could have been some more called. Maybe it would have been a little bit different in an actual game situation, but 1 penalty, 0 on the defense. The lone penalty was a false start, I think in the third quarter on offense, but all in all, pretty promising there. And obviously Tanner Ingle didn't mean it, and like we already mentioned, that's how you want your star safety to be, though. He only knows one mode.
I'd rather tell you to tone it down than to say you got to play a little hard. I'd rather tell you to tone it down. I'm telling you, if we could get him to hit people from here down.
Well, in fairness, he was at Finley's ankles, so that was the problem. But
just wrong person.
Right. You don't want to touch the quarterback. But it was all okay in hindsight because Ben Finley was able to finish out the game. Nothing too serious there. Dave Dorn said after the game that he believes it was, a bruise or maybe small contusion, something like that. So if he was able to get back in the game, he was still moving around fine. Maybe a little slight limp when he ran in that touchdown, but I don't think there's much of a concern there. So it was all good there, but I thought Ben Finley looked pretty sharp. It looked like a guy that had been in the system for at least a year, and we also get to see Aaron McLaughlin in a game-like situation for the first time, a true freshman that, could be playing high school ball still.
Very, very, very green.
He just looked young, but I tell you what, he looks like $1 million in pads and a helmet at 6'5", 230 pounds.
He's a big boy. I will say I see the arm talent. I see the talent. Right. It's just he just needs to put it together and know the system and get more experience. I really think that's the only thing that hurts him. In the spring, you do learn a lot, but you're not as focused as it would be football season. You got classes and all type of stuff, so you're not as into the game. So I definitely understand that. I will say that Jordan Houston impressed me the most out of any offensive player, though.
I want to get to him. One last thing, and out of fairness for McLaughlin, too, a lot of the reps that he took was behind the second-string offensive line, if not, third-string guys against the first-team defense. So he was under a lot of –
They're on scholarship, too.
Well, he was under a lot of pressure. That's a lot of weight to put on the young man's shoulders, particularly in his first public outing in Carter Finley before some fans. So maybe a little bit of nerves there. He was definitely under pressure, so – more good things to come from him, but good to see him get out there and see him throw the ball a little bit. But let's talk about the skill players. We already talked about the receivers a little bit, but Jordan Houston really impressed me too. I mean,
really good game.
And to say that that's your third string running back, I mean, that's pretty valuable to have that much skill in the running back room. We kind of already knew that it was a talented position group last season, but kind of some underwhelming performances in terms of the numbers that were produced last year. I think if NC State can answer some of the questions on the offensive line, this could be one of the best rushing attacks in the ACC. Because granted, I mean, Ricky Person and Zonovan Knight, your two leading rushers from last season, your two leading guys with carries last season, they were out. They were nursing some injuries through spring. They're going to be fine heading into the fall. But Jordan Houston, I think he finished with 89 yards on 10 reps. I think you'll take 8.9 yards per run.
That's not a bad day. That's not a bad day by any means. I like Houston. He's a tough runner. And, you know, it stinks because out of the 120-something or 112-something FBS schools, he probably start at least more than half right now. So it just stinks that he's in a situation where he's behind two guys like that. But I definitely think with what we've said, you know, just to build upon what you've said, you know, I like Bam Knight, and I think Bam Knight going forward should be the guy. I think that he should be the promoted guy because I just feel like for defenses, he just creates so many issues. The thing about Person, you know, has the ball catching ability, you know, decent blocker. So, I mean, I definitely see the appeal there. I think he's a very good player. I just believe that Bam Knight is the guy going forward to take this team to the next level of rushing. That's my personal opinion.
Well, I think what's nice about the running back room right now is that you've got a lot of diverse skill sets. I mean, Bam is kind of your explosive playmaker. He could break off a 50, 60-yard touchdown at any given moment. You know, Ricky Person, like you said, kind of maybe a more well-rounded guy, a little bit better pass blocker, which is kind of been
he's
some of the
all-around. Yeah.
And he's bigger, too, so he's a little bit harder to tackle at times. And then Jordan Houston, I mean, talk about explosive, too. I mean, he clearly has the ability. I'd love to see him get a little bit more involved in the passing game as well. You know, Tim Beck.
Great problem to have, though.
Oh, yeah. And then you got Delbert Mims behind that as a four-string guy. He finishes with 52 yards on 9 carries.
That Jones, too, right? The Jones kid.
Solid. Yep, DeMarcus Jones. I mean, there's a lot of talent there. There's a lot of talent there. So
I think that might be the deepest room 2 years in a row.
Well, we'll see. I mean, I will say it's easy to look good in the spring game. So
no, for sure.
We got to take that with a grain of salt. But you're right. There's a ton of talent at that position group, and you know you never want to see.
Wide receivers close though.
Well, let's talk about
wide receiver is.
Let's talk about them because we talked about Devin Carter and Thayer Thomas a little bit, and we mentioned Porter Rooks had the big catch there. But some of the young guys really impressed me too. I mean, Anthony Smith, 2 catches for 20 yards. He's super explosive. I know, you know, Dave Dorn mentioned a little bit in a spring availability that, you know, he's got to do a little bit better job of, you know, catching some of these balls. He can get open though. I mean, he might be the most athletic of that position group in terms of getting open. But if he can get his catching skills down, he's one to watch for sure in that young rotation. Julian Gray, the true freshman, just stepping foot on NC State's campus earlier this year. He had a catch for 17 yards. The very next play, I believe, he had a 17-yard run on a reverse play. Super speedy guy, sub 4.5 speed in the 40 game. Chris Scott Jr., guy that I really liked from last year. Super speedy, quick, explosive, maybe a little bit undersized, but he totally makes up for it with his athleticism. But like you mentioned, man, I mean, there's so many guys. You go down the list. Keon Lazane, 2 catches, 29 yards. I just thought there's a lot of options in that receiving core and a lot of returning talent too, so it's going to be really interesting to see how they're able to rotate that talent in and out.
Yeah, I think that I think Doran's done a great job with recruiting the wide receiver room because I think the past few years it's been tough because you've had a Harmon, you've had the guy, and I think Emeka stepped up to be the guy the next year. So, and then you're looking at it like, I think Emeka's a senior. Well, he'll be out of here after this next year. Yep. You know, you got Thayer, you got Carter, you know, but those young guys, it's good for them to learn behind experienced vets. But I definitely think one of those rookie-ish guys is actually going to make a big impact on this season. I think one of those is going to come out of this season as a potential ACC guy, just because those other three guys in 2020 made plays. They made splash plays. Like, if I'm a defensive coordinator and I see Thayer Thomas moving around, I know he might most likely get the ball. He's an active guy. With the Mecca and Carter, like, those are guys Devin Leary likes, obviously. And hell, Bailey Hockman loved Mecca. So you just got to look at it from my perspective. I think that those young guys, I don't know who, is going to be a star, though. I believe one of them is going to be a star this season. Just because there's so much in a 4-receiver set, I think one of them can really make plays. I don't know who, though.
We saw Porter Rooks get a pretty good amount of time last season as a true freshman. He's a candidate. I mean, it's like with so much youth, though, that position, I consider him a young guy, but I don't consider him one of the rookies. Like, I think I see him as kind of a returning guy. Anthony Smith is the one that I really am interested to see, because he made some impressive plays in his limited snaps last season. If he can capitalize on those and take advantage of those opportunities, I would circle his name. And apologies to Chris Scott. His catch was actually for 35 yards. They got 2 Scotts listed here on the stat sheet for receivers. And also Max Fisher, 47-yard catch on the sideline from Ben Finley. I think that was Finley's longest completion of the game. Really impressive catch. So, again, a lot of talent there. NC State fans should not just be excited for this year, but also the years to come in that position group. So let's talk a little bit about the guys up front. What did you see from the offensive line, the defensive line? Who stood out to you? What would be maybe some areas of concern of what you saw?
No holding calls, and I got a false start, but like no encroachment. That's good.
Mm-hmm.
I don't for both sides of line play. It's good when you can finish a game clean on both sides of the line. I believe that the line looks really good. The starting O-line looked good. They held up for the most part. Some of those exotic blitzes kind of threw them off. But I definitely think that you got a solid group again. You're kind of looking at the same talent pool, same base that you had last year. And that was a decent group. I think there's only one game that I would say they underwhelmed, and that was the Liberty game, to me. But I believe the defensive line, I think they're taking another step. Those guys are looking athletic. They're looking skillful. They're looking quick. The only thing I'd say is, with the style of defense they play, they probably need to, probably establish the line of scrimmage. But that was a last year issue. I didn't see it as much this game, so we'll see.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'll start with the offensive line. I'm with you in the fact that, the starting unit looked really sharp. Granted, they're going up against, second and third string guys on the
guys they've been going up against for weeks now, months. So they know the deal.
But I think that's going to be the lingering question this offseason is, can NC State develop its depth on the offensive line? And granted, you also got the transfer coming in, Chandler Zavala, who could be a starting candidate for the offensive line. We didn't see him in the spring game yet because he's yet to enroll, but I think he could be a guy that's a strong contributor. But I thought the offensive line looked sharp all in all. Defensive line, C.J. Clark looked impressive. He looks like he's been putting in some work over the spring. You saw Daniel Joseph get in some noise. It's hard to tell with the defensive line in the spring game because they can't actually tackle for a sack, so the sack numbers are...
Hold on, Joseph came back?
Yeah. Daniel Joseph is back, and he is a big returning guy.
Crazy part is I thought he was going to go for the CFL draft. That's the crazy part about it.
Well, now you know. I'm breaking news to you, Mike. But he got
it's
one.
Crazy.
I think he got one.
Oh, that's crazy. I thought he declared for the CFL draft, not the NFL draft.
Right.
I didn't see him out there. I wish I would have looked for him there.
Well, he got one sack. I mean, granted, two-hand touch with the sack. So, and Savion Jackson, another guy that. What?
I like the Savion Jackson kid.
He's a guy that there's a lot of buzz about him this spring. A guy that really could be a big factor coming into the fall. I know he made some noise as well. And then, of course, you got the transfer from Florida State, Corey Durden, coming in as a potential nose / tackle guy that, again, kind of brings some high-level talent to go along with C.J. Clark, who's going to be replacing that gap. I mean, Aleem McNeil's really the main guy you're missing from that defensive line. Other than that, you're getting basically everybody back. And I know those are big shoes to fill with Aleem, but
big shoes, big.
Clark and Durden coming in, that's about as good of guys that you would want to help fill those shoes as you could. Yeah, for sure. And then
that's a good rotation.
We didn't see everybody in the linebacker core back. Obviously, Peyton Wilson, Drake Thomas were sitting out of the game. They haven't been participating in spring practices. They rehab some nursing injuries from last season. But all in all, I thought the linebacker core looked pretty solid. Jordan Poole, the true freshman, he made a very impressive play tracking down Jordan Houston late in the second quarter. Jordan Houston broke free for, I think, like a 19-yard run or something like that.
Is that the one he got hurt on?
That's the one he got hurt on. And an update for those that aren't in the know about it, but I don't think it's a very serious injury. The x-ray came back negative, so Doran mentioned after the game it sounded like turf toe more than anything. But it's kind of the end of the spring session, so there's still a lot of time for these guys to nurse up, heal up, and get ready for the season and into summer and fall camp. But, yeah, the defense is really that area that I'm most excited about for next year because of all the returning talent. Anybody else in particular stand out to you, Mike? What was just your general impression of what you saw on the defensive end, guys flying around out there, making tackles, of course, with limited contact?
You got Tanner Engel. If I just need him to stay in the game, and he'll be a big impact. The Fordham kid.
Yep, pick six.
Yeah, I noticed him. I noticed him and Treco.
Yeah, the guy that intercepted Leary.
Yeah, those are two guys I noticed. I'll say that on the defensive side of the ball, the biggest thing I noticed was just guys flying to the ball, and it's spring ball. So it's you want to play as hard as you can, and these guys aren't trying to hurt each other like they would someone on another team. But I definitely liked the way they were flying around, and they looked like they were communicating well. And it's a spring game, so it's hard to see with the younger guys, but it looked like, to me, the communication on defense was much smoother. It looked smooth. Like, when I saw last season, you got guys rotating in at positions they never played before. It looked kind of like, I don't know what I'm doing. I think this spring game, those guys I saw last year who didn't look like they knew what they were doing definitely looked like, okay, I know what I'm doing. And everybody seemed to be in the right place, whether they made the play or not. That was my biggest thing. Just be where you're supposed to be. And I think that's the improvement on defense I saw, is that guys were where they were supposed to be, even if they didn't make the play, which you could correct that.
I think there's varying opinions about how important the spring game is, whether it's from the fan perspective, where they just want to take everything away from the spring game. They're hyped. They're ready to say NC State's going to go win the Natty after the spring game. Media, on the other hand, they're like, man, don't take anything away from the spring game. But, Mike, you're here as a guy that has experienced it, been in spring games yourself. So what do you make of spring games? What do you think, as observers and spectators in this situation, what are some things that you can genuinely take away from what you've seen in the spring game, and what are some things that you really got to see, an opposing competitor in the fall to really take away some solid observations?
I think the spring game, to me, is really for skill guys. So to show what they can do, because for line play, you really can't come off the edge full speed and go sack the quarterback. So there's always that. And in a real game, a quarterback's just not going to let you sack him either. So, a quarterback might sit in the pocket more comfortable than he normally would. So there are things from a line perspective that aren't realistic, but I think the things you can take away from it, especially skill guys, you can see potential breakout stars from young guys. That's the thing for the spring game. It's an opportunity for young guys in a game situation to showcase what they can do in a limited format, because they keep it basic. They don't get exotic that much. So to me, I think spring games are kind of an exhale for the entire experience, because spring ball is a tough grind. You got You're going probably more classes than you would in the fall. You're going and harder classes. You most likely they're lifting weights every day almost, plus practice. Something in the season you might lift once or twice. I don't know. Big Thunder might have them boys lifting 3-4 times. Thunder gets down with the weights, so I don't know. But I just think that when you have those young guys, this is their chance to showcase. It's a young guy showcase. For the older vets, they kind of are like, I don't know, maybe this was just a me thing. They're like, all right, let's get this spring game over with so we can get closer to the regular season.
It's just kind of like a fun, this is Saturday, we go through the motions,
Yeah, because the vets are usually done after the first quarter or the half of the second. So they're like, all right, let me get my few plays in, ball out, and then go home.
No, I think that's a great way to sum it up and makes a whole lot of sense from this angle. So before we get to game balls, Mike, from what you've seen and your observations of the returning talent coming back from 2020, what you saw in the spring game, what you've heard from the buzz of spring football practice, what are your expectations for this NC State team going into the fall, and what do you think the main things that they need to focus on over the summer heading into the season in order for this to be another year of improvement? Because obviously there's a lot of returning talent. Obviously there was a year of tremendous growth last year, going from a 4-8 season to an 8-4 season with a lot of success. But the schedule's going to get tougher this year. It's going to be a little bit more of a return to normalcy. So kind of what are your expectations, and what are some things that you think this team really needs to be working on over the next several months?
I think that after a stranger in 2020, you did lose a few guys, but not a lot. I think it's time to build. I definitely think it's time to build. It's not time to sit back and hope. So at this point, my expectation for 2021 for NC State, I believe that anything under 8 wins is, it's not what we should be striving for. We should be striving for 9-10 wins this year. That's the goal.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah.
But I think expectation-wise, it should be at least 9. Just get one more than last year, build upon last year, in hopes that the next year you get to 10. I think just going one game higher, that's not too much to ask for. Even if the schedule got harder, because there were some wins early on in 2020 that I was like, oh, well, didn't think we were going to win that one. So I look at it as build upon last year, keep the running game strong, and also just on defense, just keep flying to the ball and stay rugged. Don't try to play pretty football on defense, man. Just stay hard and keep that same mentality that they had last year, in some of those games where, they were in dog fights, but they pulled it out. Because on defense, guys are going to score. Unless you're the 2000 Ravens defense, people are going to score. Schematically, you can't stop everything, especially in today's offenses. You just can't. So I will say just pound the run and stop the run. And all these guys got another year of experience. I don't see why they can't get 9 wins.
I think this is why we get along so well, Mike, because we tend to agree with each other. We don't really vary with our opinions too much. I'm with you. I think 8 wins kind of seems like the floor of the expectations of this year, because you've got so much returning talent. You're not going to get this type of returning talent ever again, this situation. This is a very talented team. Now, the schedule does get harder. I think that's the one thing that I would keep NC State fans grounded with, and then the fact that an 8-4 season this year would still be an improvement from the 8-4 season last year, because you look at Clemson coming to Raleigh. You look at a road trip to Miami as your coastal crossover game this year. You still got Carolina coming to home, their preseason top 10, top 15 team. Plus, you've got, pretty competitive non-conference schedule. You open up the season with USF, a respectable American Athletic opponent, to open up the season on a Thursday night. Then you head down to Starkville, Mississippi the week after that at Mississippi State, tough SEC opponent. Louisiana Tech, another, respectable non-conference FBS opponent on that non-conference slate. But yeah, 8 wins, maybe 9-10, because that the expectations for both the offense and defense is improvement. You've got 10 returning starters on defense. You'd expect some of the question marks from last season to get answered. And then on the offensive side of the ball, you got your guy coming back healthy. I mean, your starter from last year only started in 3 games, so you did most of your damage last year with a backup quarterback. Plus, you're going into year 2 with Tim Beck as the offensive coordinator, so there's more familiarity. The main questions on offense, I think, are really the offensive line, but there's a ton to be excited about if you're an NC State fan, and I think this season's going to be fascinating. It's going to be great to have fans back in the stadium, get some more normalcy with the games. I miss the marching band, miss the cheerleaders, miss all the things that go along with college football that make college football great. But
it would be nice.
Yeah. I mean, the spring game attendance it's kind of like the games that felt last year when they were home games, like NC State Duke, they had just parents for the first home game, maybe first couple, and then after that they let in limited capacity outside, but it was really just kind of like half capacity in the lower dome of Carter Finley Stadium. But anybody that's a longtime NC State fan knows that place can fill up. If it's full 56,000, that place can get loud, especially for a night game, and that's the environment I think we all miss. But let's go ahead and give out our game balls, Mike. I'll let you go first. If you want, you can give one on offense and defense. You don't have to, but up to you if you're torn between an offensive and a defensive guy. Because I think there's a lot of strong candidates, I think.
Oh, yeah, it's a spring game, so you can really give it to anybody. If I had to go offense, I'd go Devin Carter. Defense, I'd go the Fordham kid. I apologize that I don't know his
Caden
first
Fordham.
name, but I think both of those guys, showed – they had very impressive showings. And I think that Devin Carter's obviously going to have a strong year. And I think, man, maybe this Fordham kid, it's a strong linebacker room. So tough to even get a snap. But right. I think that if he does get him, I don't think it'll be a change in production.
Fair enough. I'll give one on offense, one on defense. I'll give my offensive game ball to Jordan Houston. I mean, I think he had the most impressive stats, but really some of the explosiveness on his runs really stuck out to me. I mean, you could give it to Thayer because he had the 2 touchdowns, one receiving, one throwing. But Thayer's going to be one of your stars.
We'll do that during the season, so I'm not worried about
Thayer's going to get plenty of game balls later this fall, so I'm not worried about him. And Leary looked good, but I don't think he was. Now, if he went out there and completed 80% of his passes and threw 3 or 4 touchdowns, maybe I give it to him. But
he'll get plenty during the season.
He's easing back in. He'll get plenty during the season. You're exactly right. On defense, I'll give it to another guy that maybe won't get as many this fall because he's a younger guy. But Jordan Poole, man, that tackle on Jordan Houston, because that is not an easy guy to tackle. Tracking him down from behind and forcing the fumble on that play, a guy that's been in the system for 2 years now, he knows ball security is important. But for a freshman to have that kind of instinct on, not just a play where it easily could have broken off for a touchdown, for him to not only make the tackle but also force a fumble, it shows great instinct. It shows the athleticism. It shows the talent.
It forces his way into some playing time. Sometimes guys do that. You got a Peyton Wilson, you got a Drake Thomas, you got guys like that.
Yeah.
And then there's just a guy who's like, he forces his way into playing time. And you just can't stop him. Now, that's a tough room to beat in.
Probably the toughest.
Very tough room.
Probably the toughest.
Because those guys are established.
Right.
So I will say, just like I said with Fordham, I think if he gets in, I don't think the production changes. I think that there might be a few growing pains, but besides that, I think guy flies around, I think that Jordan Poole's definitely a guy. So Jordan Houston, I definitely think he impressed me more than he did in the 2020 season. And it might just be due to the fact that Jordan Houston didn't get the sexiest carries during the season.
Right.
He got hard-nosed, strong, I need a 3rd and 1 carries. Those are the type of stuff Jordan Houston got. But now I got to see him in a different role. I got to see him be kind of like a feature back.
Right.
So, and that's exciting to see, when you're behind Bam in person. I mean, that's a tough customer.
He's just a sophomore too. So, I mean, there's still plenty of seasons of eligibility left. You look at going into next season, you'd have to imagine after next year, either Ricky or Bam's going to be gone, if not both, considering how well they play next season. So,
some carries. Let's give Houston a few more carries, man. He looked good.
He was getting some more at the end of the season. And plus, I mean, it's a position where it's not a bad thing to have three guys get significant snaps because you like to have the freshest guy possible getting the ball when you can. And to those linebackers, that's no knock on Fordham or Poole. Those guys could certainly compete for time if they step up and do it. That's just the deepest room. I mean, last year.
And that's an ACC room. I think that the linebacker room is a potential 1 to 2 all ACC guys. So, to be fair,
Right.
It's hard to take a guy's position who's a starter Peyton Wilson definitely most likely will be on somebody's all ACC preseason list.
Oh, he to me, he's the leading candidate for preseason Defensive Player of the Year. He was a snub last year. He probably should have been the Defensive Player of the Year. He led the ACC in tackles for the first time at NC State in 20 years. So that guy is a special talent. Those guys are locks to start. Him, Drake Thomas, Isaiah Moore. We didn't even mention Isaiah Moore, a team captain, a guy that's really solid at middle linebacker.
Solid. That's what I'm saying. That's a tough room to get into.
And Vi Jones was coming off as a reserve role last year. I mean, that guy's starting at a lot of programs. Plus, Jalen Scott looked impressive in the spring game. He's a totally capable guy.
Vi Jones can play. He can play a little DB too, which I like. He's got a little bit of DB in it and some good linebacker. Like he's got the body for both. So I will say I like him as a Swiss Army. But you know who he reminds me of? Who I played with? Wright. He played nickel for us. What's his name?
I'll let you come to it. I'll let you think about it. I will say Vi Jones.
Dexter Wright.
What's that?
Kind of reminds me of Dexter Wright.
Okay.
A big guy.
Well, I think I would hope I think that's a compliment. I wasn't on the.
No, that's a compliment. I'm just talking about body and stuff. But yeah, he's a decent sized kid.
And he was a special teams MVP last season. I mean, it seemed like a quarter of the games he had a huge kick block. I mean, he basically made the game-winning play against Liberty. You could argue he made the game-winning play against Duke with that punt block early in the first quarter when it could have gotten ugly in that game early because NC State was kind of asleep in that first quarter, really the first half. But they bounced back. They win that game solidly. But I think that's enough. I think we've analyzed the spring game enough. And Mike, hopefully we can have you back on maybe as we get closer to the season, do a little season preview. But it's great to have you back on. It's great to talk a little bit of football. We've talked about basketball for the past several months now, but it's good to get the football juices flowing. So to our listeners at home, thank you for listening. Please remember to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast wherever you listen to us. We're on Apple Podcast app, Spotify, Google Play. You can also watch this podcast on YouTube, as always. And while you're on YouTube, subscribe to our YouTube channel and give this video a thumbs up. Follow us on social media. You can follow our main account at the Wolfpacker. You can follow me personally at Justin H. Will on Twitter, and you can follow Mike Rose at SavageMike90 on Twitter. Give us a like on Facebook, NC State Wolfpack on thewolfpacker.com. And for Mike Rose, this is Justin Williams, and this has been the Wolfpacker Podcast.